Hey guys, tonight we are going to lean back, stretch out, and let our thoughts drift through the marble streets and sandy courtyards of ancient Greece. Imagine the flicker of torches against stone, the murmur of distant fountains, and the shuffle of sandals on flagstones. In this moment, you are not in your bed or on your couch. You're wandering into a world where gods and mortals squabble over real estate like rival landlords. And somehow, a single tree ends up deciding the fate of an entire city. You probably won't survive this, but that's fine. It's bedtime history and nothing here is out to actually bite you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time down below. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward into a scene that is both myth and memory. The founding contest of Athens. The air feels charged, though not with electricity. More like the polite tension before two professors begin to argue in a seminar. The city is still in its infancy. More scattered dwellings and fishing boats than gleaming temples. Yet already the people are nervous. They need a patron deity, someone to lend them strength and protect their fragile little settlement from raiders, droughts, and all the other things ancient life constantly threw at you. Two divine figures step forward. Poseidon, the Earthshaker, sea god, trident wielder with a beard like a storm cloud, and Athena, the ever-calm, sharp-eyed strategist with her cloak pinned neatly at the shoulder. The people do not yet know who to choose, and so the gods will offer gifts. Whoever provides the greater benefit earns the honor of naming the city and watching over it forever. You watch Poseidon first. He always makes an entrance. His trident slams into the ground, and suddenly a spring bursts forth, water gushing in a sparkling arc. The crowd gasps. They've never seen anything like it. Some whisper, surely this is the sign of prosperity. Endless water. Yet, as you lean closer, you notice a villager tentatively dipping his hand into the pool, lifting it to his lips, and then promptly spitting it out. The spring is salt water. It smells faintly of the ocean and brine. Impressive, yes, but drinkable, no. Useful for crops, also no. You can almost see the eyebrows of the townsfolk furrowing in unison. Poseidon frowns as though wondering why no one else appreciates salty puddles. Then it is Athena's turn. She doesn't make a booming speech or conjure waves. Instead, she kneels quietly and presses her hand into the soil. Slowly, a sapling unfurls. Slender and pale, leaves shimmering green-silver in the sunlight. Within moments, it is a tree, modest yet sturdy, its branches bearing small, bitter fruit. At first, the villagers look confused. A tree? They already have trees. But then someone plucks a fruit, cracks it open, tastes the flesh, and tilts their head in thought. The oil drips rich and golden. Another rubs the leaves, inhaling their fragrance. You can almost feel the light bulb moment spread through the crowd. This contest isn't just mythology. It reflects real tensions in Greek history. Scholars point out that Athens was a city on rocky soil, not well suited for grain or cattle. What it did have, however, was land where hardy olive trees could grow. So the myth of Athena's gift may actually encode a recognition of geography's role in shaping destiny. And amusingly enough, historians still argue whether the story is a simple folktale about useful crops, or a carefully crafted bit of propaganda justifying the olive's economic dominance. You trail behind the citizens, listening as their murmurs shift. Some admire Poseidon's raw power. Others point out that salt water is mostly good for fish and not much else. Athena's tree, though plain, offers oil, light, food, and wood. Imagine the debates, the practical farmers arguing for trees, the fishermen trying to defend their beloved sea god. It's almost like an ancient town hall meeting, only with deities looming overhead. And in that moment, you realize how ordinary and relatable this epic contest actually is. It's less thunderbolts and more like arguing whether to build a parking lot or a park. The gods are simply giant metaphors for civic planning, yet you sense something deeper in Athena's gift. The tree is alive. It grows slowly, steadily, without drama. It embodies patience, foresight, and resilience, all qualities the Athenians would later pride themselves on. By now, you're drifting further into the scene, not so much watching the contest as being pulled into its rhythm. The saltwater spring bubbles faintly in the background, Poseidon's pride stinging as he watches villagers turn toward Athena's quiet, leafy miracle. You imagine him muttering under his breath about ungrateful mortals. Meanwhile, Athena stands serene, as though she already knows the outcome, her hand lightly resting on the tree's bark. And so, as dusk settles over the Acropolis, the choice begins to crystallize. Not through loud applause, but through the quiet weight of practicality. The city will side with Athena. The olive tree, modest as it seems, will shape its economy, its rituals, even its art. And you, standing here with sand between your toes, are about to see how a single tree roots itself into legend. The crowd has barely finished murmuring about the tree when Poseidon, never one to enjoy being upstaged, clears his throat with the thunderous subtlety of a man dragging a chair across marble. His gift is still there, shimmering in the afternoon light, that pool of salt water glistening like a polished shield. The spring itself is undeniably spectacular. Just picture the drama, the trident strike, the roar of water, villagers leaping back as foam splash their ankles. From a showmanship perspective, Poseidon has nailed it. If there were Olympic points for presentation, he'd already be holding the laurel crown. But then the reality sets in. Someone tries again to sip the water only to cough and spit it out. The taste is briny, harsh, almost metallic. Salt water isn't exactly a refreshing beverage on a hot Mediterranean day. And it's not just about drinking. Imagine trying to water barley or grapes with it. The plants would curl up like forgotten leftovers. Here's a mainstream fact you may not know. In several Greek sources, the gift is actually described not just as a saltwater spring, but also as a well of seawater connected to Poseidon's domain. The Athenians even called it the Erechtheus Sea, a symbolic little puddle kept in a temple for centuries, as though politely saying, "Look, we still remember Poseidon's effort." That detail always makes you wonder, did the ancient Athenians keep it out of respect? Or was it more like preserving a family member's failed science fair project? Historians still argue whether this gesture was reverence or subtle shade. The real issue, though, is usefulness. Poseidon is the god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses, and none of those scream stable urban planning. His offering feels like a flex, a reminder that he controls the terrifying waves and quakes beyond Athens' walls. Saltwater may not hydrate anyone, but it does remind them of their dependence on the unpredictable sea. That's a kind of power in itself, if not the friendly, nurturing type. Now, tucked into this saltwater story is a quirky tidbit. Some later versions of the myth claim Poseidon didn't just make a spring, he gave the Athenians a horse. Yes, a whole horse, probably standing there awkwardly while people argued about it. One tradition says the trident strike produced the first horse itself, a symbol of war and speed. You can almost imagine the poor villagers muttering, "Great, so we can gallop into battle." But what about lunch? The inconsistency shows just how myths evolved to reflect needs. When horses became central to warfare, Poseidon's gift was rewritten as a more competitive contender against the olive. As you drift through this scene, you notice how the villagers hover around Poseidon's spring. Some are genuinely impressed. Fishermen argue that saltwater means Poseidon will bless their boats, maybe even calm storms. A young man points out that trade ships rely on Poseidon's goodwill, so surely his spring is a sign of prosperity. And, in truth, they have a point. Without the sea, Athens would never become a naval power. It's just that salt water in your bucket isn't nearly as convincing as oil on your bread. And still, Poseidon looks every inch the god. Shoulders squared, trident gleaming, beard flowing like storm surf. His eyes flash with pride, or maybe annoyance, as the crowd continues to glance back at Athena's unassuming tree. You almost feel a little bad for him. It's like showing up to a potluck with an elaborate flaming dessert, only to have everyone rave about somebody else's simple but delicious loaf of bread. The tension is building. People whisper, judges shuffle their feet, and you catch yourself thinking about the bigger picture. Saltwater might not be practical, but symbolically, Poseidon's gift underscores Athens' reliance on the sea. Centuries later, Athens' navy would dominate the Aegean, wooden triremes cutting across waves like knives. Was this myth a foreshadowing, or just irony at Poseidon's expense? Again, scholars still argue whether the myth was shaped after Athens became a maritime power, or whether it genuinely reflects early anxieties about survival. You watch as a child tosses a pebble into the spring, sending ripples across the surface. The pool sparkles, enchanting in its own way. A salty little miracle, a promise that the sea is never far away. Poseidon's chest swells with satisfaction, though you suspect he knows the tide is already turning in Athena's favor. His gift is a spectacle, but the city doesn't need spectacle. It needs sustenance. And so, the saltwater glistens, a shimmering reminder of Poseidon's grandeur and his blind spot for everyday practicality. You find yourself smiling, half asleep already, at the absurdity of it all. Gods bickering, mortals weighing pros and cons, a puddle of salty water standing against a single leafy tree. Somehow, in this quiet contest, you can already sense the faint beginning of Athena's triumph, and Poseidon's lingering grudge like storm clouds building on a horizon that never quite arrives. Athena has been quiet through all of Poseidon's noise. You picture her standing to one side, the kind of calm confidence that makes you slightly suspicious. Like she's already checked her exam answers twice while Poseidon is still scribbling furiously. When the villagers begin to mutter about the impracticality of salty water, she finally steps forward. Her sandals hardly make a sound on the rocky earth, and her gray eyes seem to look through centuries as she kneels, touches the ground, and presses something almost invisible into the soil. It doesn't roar, it doesn't explode, it doesn't splash anyone's ankles. It simply grows. Slowly at first, then with quiet determination, a sapling rises. Its trunk is slim, its leaves small and silvery green, shimmering as though dusted with moonlight. Soon enough, the branches stretch, carrying fruit, small, bitter olives not immediately appetizing. And yet, the crowd leans closer. Something about it feels alive in a way Poseidon's puddle does not. Here's the mainstream fact tucked neatly into this moment. Olives were cultivated in Greece as early as the Bronze Age, around 3000 BCE, especially on Crete. Archaeological finds even suggest that olive oil was already being pressed and traded long before Athens became famous for it. In other words, Athena's gift wasn't just mythic symbolism. It reflected a real, ancient lifeline for Mediterranean societies. One villager picks an olive and tastes it. His face scrunches. Too bitter. A neighbor laughs, then remembers. If you soak or press them, you get oil. Golden, smooth, useful. Another rubs a leaf between her fingers and inhales its resinous scent. A third imagines wood for carving small tools or fuel for lamps. Suddenly, the picture becomes clear. This is no ordinary tree. This is survival. Now, for a quirky tidbit, ancient Greek athletes used olive oil not just as nourishment or light, but also as body polish. They would anoint themselves before competitions, skin gleaming under the sun, then scrape it off afterward with little tools called strigils. You can almost imagine villagers staring at the tree and already daydreaming about oiled-up wrestlers glistening in the marketplace. Truly, Athena was thinking ahead to both practicality and showbiz. As you linger in this moment, Athena straightens, dusting her hands. She doesn't gloat, she doesn't need to. The tree speaks for itself. Her gift is renewable, enduring, and tied to patience. Values the Athenians might not fully articulate now, but will grow into as the centuries unfold. The olive takes time to bear fruit after all. It doesn't erupt overnight like Poseidon's spring. It requires nurturing, planning, strategy. Historians still argue whether the myth of Athena's olive tree was constructed retroactively to justify Athens' economic reliance on olives, or whether it predates that reliance entirely. Was the myth born from necessity, or did necessity bend itself around the myth? Either way, you find yourself smirking at how neatly the gods' contest matches up with the geography. Rocky hillsides, perfect for olives. Not so much for wheat fields. Athena's gift also carries a symbolic layer. Olives bring light when turned into oil, literally illuminating homes with their lamps. They nourish the body, and in ritual, they anoint the sacred. In some accounts, Athena herself is imagined teaching mortals how to cultivate and press olives, her role extending beyond the tree into daily labor. That's not just a gift, it's a curriculum. She's basically inventing a vocational training program. As you lean against the imagined tree trunk, you notice its stillness. The leaves whisper faintly in the wind, their silvery underside flashing like coins. The villagers are already speculating. Oil for cooking, oil for trade, oil for lamplighting. A whole economy hidden inside this unassuming gift. Poseidon's spring may have impressed, but it cannot build livelihoods. And here's the fun little modern aside. Olives are the ultimate multitaskers. Food, skincare, religious symbol, even hair conditioner if you trust ancient beauty routines. It's like Athena showed up with the equivalent of a smartphone, one object, endless applications. Poseidon basically brought a fancy decorative fountain. You know which gift ends up getting more 5-star reviews. Athena steps back, arms folded, expression serene. Poseidon scowls, but there is nothing to be done. The villagers' eyes are on the tree, their imaginations already filling with possibilities. You too can feel the weight of it. Not just a tree, but a promise. A gift that demands patience, yes, but rewards it with endurance. The tree stands taller by the minute, its roots pushing deeper into the rocky soil, anchoring itself. In the back of your mind, you know this tree will remain, even after empires fall and myths blur. Athena's gift has already won, even before the judges announce their decision. And here you are, drifting further into sleep, wrapped in the faint rustle of olive leaves. The crowd isn't just gasping at miracles anymore. They're whispering, debating, and side-eyeing one another as the weight of decision settles in. You stand among them, feeling that uniquely human blend of awe and practicality. On one side, Poseidon's glistening saltwater spring, dramatic, mysterious, a symbol of his roaring seas. On the other, Athena's quiet little olive tree, modest but bursting with hidden potential. The villagers don't get to decide alone. The gods, the kings, and even some shadowy judges will weigh in. Imagine it like an ancient talent show panel, only with a bit more at stake than a recording contract. On the divine side, Zeus himself is often imagined looming somewhere in the background, the eternal referee of squabbling siblings. He doesn't interfere much here, probably sipping nectar and thinking, "Ah, children." In some accounts, the judging panel also included legendary kings of Athens like Cecrops, half-man, half-serpent, whose tale presumably made for awkward seating arrangements. The villagers trust him to see past the dazzle and consider what really benefits the city. Now, a mainstream fact for grounding. In Athenian tradition, Cecrops was remembered as one of the first kings to bring order to the region, teaching laws, burial rites, and social structure. His inclusion as judge wasn't random. It emphasized Athens' claim to being not just a city of warriors, but a city of law and reason. Having him weigh gifts turned the myth into a civic lesson. But not everyone agreed immediately. Historians still argue whether the original myth emphasized a split in loyalty. Some say men preferred Poseidon while women supported Athena, reflecting deeper tensions about gender and civic life. One old version even claims that when women's votes tipped the contest toward Athena, Poseidon retaliated with floods, and ever since, women were denied the right to vote in Athenian affairs. Whether that's history or mythic afterthought, it does show how a simple "which god is cooler" argument could spiral into commentary about power and politics. You can hear the murmurs. Poseidon's gift is grand, but useless here. Athena's tree is humble, but it feeds us. Poseidon is mighty. Should we not fear him? The debate feels like a town council meeting where half the villagers want to build a glittering harbor, and the other half just want bread on the table. Here's a quirky tidbit. Later writers say that even after the decision, a salty little pool, Poseidon's spring, and Athena's olive tree were kept side by side in the Erechtheion, a temple on the Acropolis. Tourists could actually walk in and see both gifts still preserved. Imagine it like Athens proudly saying, "We picked the tree, but don't worry, Poseidon. We kept your puddle too." Ancient diplomacy at its finest. Back in the moment, Cecrops, or whichever authority figure presides, paces slowly between the gifts. His serpent tail curls and uncoils, flicking dust from the stones. He listens to the people, watches Athena's calm expression, glances at Poseidon's stormy scowl. He thinks about Athens' rocky soil, about the fishermen already hauling nets from the sea, about what the city really needs to thrive. You find yourself drifting into the rhythm of the arguments, how they balance practicality and pride. A few young men boast about how horses and ships could make Athens powerful if they honored Poseidon. Older farmers counter, "And will your ships feed you? Will your horses light your homes?" The olive tree's usefulness stacks up like neat columns on a temple facade. Oil for cooking, light for night, balm for wounds, trade for wealth. The saltwater spring feels more like a monument, inspiring but inert. The decision is not shouted but settled. You can almost feel the air still, like a vote cast in silence. The city will belong to Athena. The olive will be their symbol, their economy, their story. Poseidon, magnificent though he is, has been outmaneuvered by something far humbler. You glance at his face, a mask of thunderclouds, pride bruised but not shattered. Athena's lips curve in the faintest smile. Not smug, just knowing. Somewhere far in the distance, you hear waves crashing harder than usual, as though Poseidon is already sulking, promising storms. The people, however, are turning toward Athena, their new patron, their tree already taking root in the collective imagination. And so the judges weigh the gifts, and the verdict becomes clear. Not the flashy promise of water from the sea, but the steady reliability of olives from the earth. You stand in that moment, lulled by the rustling leaves and the faint hiss of the spring, aware that in this quiet decision, the fate of a city, perhaps even the shape of Western history, has just been sealed. The olive tree is chosen, but its story doesn't end with the contest. If anything, this is where it begins to unfurl in every direction, like roots spreading through soil. You stand near the sapling, watching villagers circle around it. Their voices are buzzing with speculation. What can we do with this fruit? How will we prepare it? What else can the oil be used for? The tree doesn't just stand as a symbol, it becomes a toolkit. You trail after a farmer who plucks one of the small green olives, turns it over in his hand, and wrinkles his nose at the bitter taste. Not great raw, but crush them, soak them, press them, and suddenly the bitter fruit becomes liquid gold. And so it begins. Amphorae filled with oil, jars carried on donkeys, bowls of gleaming liquid that reflect the firelight like little puddles of sunlight. Here's your mainstream fact. Olive oil became so central to the Greek economy that amphorae stamped with city emblems were shipped across the Mediterranean. In fact, archaeologists have discovered entire mounds of broken amphorae in places like Rome and Carthage. Vast landfills of ancient packaging waste, a reminder that even in antiquity, global trade created its share of trash heaps. As you wander among the villagers, you hear them listing possible uses. Oil for cooking, of course. Drizzled over bread, softening grains, enriching stews. Oil for lamps, giving light in homes where torches would be too smoky. Oil for anointing, marking rituals from birth to burial. And oil for skin, because yes, even in 500 BCE, people were worried about dry elbows. Here comes a quirky tidbit. Some ancient recipes for skincare mixed olive oil with powdered lead. Yes, lead. Imagine lathering yourself in that before a night out in Athens. Oh, your skin is glowing. Thanks, it's the slow poisoning. Historians still argue whether those cosmetic practices were widespread or only for the wealthiest classes who could afford to experiment with questionable beauty hacks. You can see Athena's gift stretching its branches into every corner of life. Wrestlers cover themselves with oil before competitions. Priests anoint sacred statues with it. Housewives keep amphorae tucked in kitchens, while traders load them onto ships bound for distant ports. The olive becomes as much a currency as a crop. Even taxes are sometimes paid in oil. The villagers test new methods, pressing fruit between stones, twisting cloth bags to squeeze out drops, catching the golden liquid in clay bowls. It's slow, messy work, but it feels miraculous, like watching sunlight transformed into nourishment by hand. The first lamps are lit that evening, their flames steady, their glow soft. You lean closer and feel the faint warmth of the oil-burning lamp, as though Athena herself is whispering, "See? This is how a city survives the dark." Meanwhile, Poseidon's spring still bubbles in the background, ignored except for the occasional child tossing stones into it. The salt water is impressive, but it cannot fry fish or light a room. It is theater, not survival. You notice Poseidon himself fading from the scene, muttering thunder into the distance. His gift will be remembered, yes, but never embraced. What fascinates you now is how quickly the olive spreads into symbols. Branches become emblems of peace. Wreaths are twisted into crowns for victors at the Panathenaic Games. Oil becomes prizes, offered in lavish amounts to athletes, each amphora painted with black figure scenes of contests. Imagine winning 100 jars of oil at a single festival, like being paid in endless coupons for the grocery store, only much more valuable. You linger on the tree again, listening to its leaves whisper in the breeze. The villagers have stopped doubting. The bitterness of the raw olive no longer deters them. They know how to transform it. The golden oil glistens in bowls, catching torchlight like captured dawn. In that glow, you can almost see the centuries ahead. Ships heavy with amphorae, temples lit with oil lamps, artists painting olives on vases, philosophers sipping bread dipped in oil while muttering about ethics. Historians still argue whether the olive tree myth was written as an etiology, a story invented after the fact to explain why Athens relied so heavily on olives. Perhaps the city didn't owe its identity to the tree at all. Perhaps the myth was propaganda crafted by leaders to give divine legitimacy to their most profitable export. Yet lying here, in the quiet hum of this ancient evening, you feel how little that matters. Myth and necessity entwine like branches on a tree. And so the olive's many uses become the heart of Athens. You smell the oil warming in clay pots, see its glow stretching shadows across whitewashed walls, hear the soft scrape of amphorae being sealed with wax. Athena's modest gift turns into the daily bread of an entire civilization. And you, lulled by its steady usefulness, feel sleep tugging at your edges, like warm oil smoothing into tired skin. The tree is no longer just a food source. It's a philosophy lesson wrapped in bark and leaves. As you linger near its branches, you start to notice how Athena's gift isn't only practical. It has character, almost a personality. The olive isn't a flashy fruit, it doesn't grow quickly, and it certainly doesn't win prizes for sweetness. Instead, it demands patience. You have to cure it, press it, and wait for it to yield what it can. That patience becomes a mirror of Athena herself, goddess of wisdom, strategy, and foresight. When you touch one of the leaves silver green in the torchlight, you almost hear Athena's whisper. Think long, not short. Her olive embodies wisdom not through sudden brilliance, but through slow, steady return. Just like strategy in war or debate, it isn't about the loudest first strike, but about endurance. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Athenians later made the olive tree so central to their identity that olive oil crowned their greatest festival, the Panathenaia. Victors weren't given gold or silver. They were awarded amphorae of oil, sometimes hundreds of gallons. Winning athletes didn't just gain glory, they gained literal wealth because oil was tradable anywhere in the Mediterranean. A prize that glimmered in both symbolic and economic light. And then comes the quirky detail. According to some traditions, sacred olive trees around Athens were so holy that if someone dared to chop one down, they could be sentenced to death. Or, at the very least, fined heavily. Imagine that. Illegal logging, ancient addition. Picture a sneaky villager thinking, free firewood, only to be dragged before a magistrate because the tree technically belonged to Athena. Ancient bureaucracy at its finest. Still, scholars debate whether the olive was already sacred before the myth of Athena's contest, or whether the myth was invented to explain its sacredness. It's a chicken and egg argument. Did people honor olives because of Athena, or did they assign Athena to the olive because they already relied on it? Historians still argue, tracing fragments of texts and temple remains, like detectives piecing together the world's oldest marketing campaign. You trail behind a group of young men who stand in the shadow of the tree, discussing how it reflects Athena's essence. She is not just clever, she is measured. She doesn't rush. Unlike her half-brother Ares, who charges into battle with blind fury, Athena plots and plans, and so too does her tree. It's not an instant feast, but a slow investment. You begin to see the olive not just as food, but as philosophy embodied in wood and fruit. When victors in war carried olive branches as symbols of peace, they weren't just holding twigs. They were holding a reminder of balance, strength tempered with wisdom. The branches meant, we could keep fighting, but we'd rather not. They were the earliest peace treaties held in green and silver leaves. And then you catch yourself smiling at how practical and poetic this all is. Athena essentially walked into a contest and said, here, take a tree that feeds you, lights your house, soothes your skin, fuels your trade, and symbolizes wisdom itself. It's like showing up at a birthday party with a Swiss Army knife while everyone else brings confetti. As the city slowly adopts the olive as its emblem, you hear villagers weaving little stories about it. Children are told that the olive tree listens to prayers whispered under its branches. Old men stroke its bark before settling disputes, convinced Athena is watching. Oil lamps flicker in doorways, their smoke curling up like tiny offerings of thanks. You notice how the tree sits at the crossroads of sacred and ordinary. It is divine enough to belong in temples, yet common enough to sit in clay bowls on kitchen shelves. That duality is Athena's essence too. Lofty goddess of strategy, yet patron of crafts like weaving. High wisdom meeting daily life. You lean back, feeling the warm hum of oil lamps glowing in the dark streets. The olive has already become more than food. It is a way of seeing the world, steady, balanced, deliberate. In this glow, you sense why the Athenians called their goddess not just a warrior, but a thinker, and why her favorite tree became a living textbook of patience and wisdom. And so the symbol deepens. Not just a gift of survival, but a reminder that cleverness is nothing without steadiness, and brilliance fades without roots. The olive tree embodies what Athens itself wants to become. Not just strong, but wise. You wander a little further from the tree and notice that, while the people are thrilled with Athena's gift, Athena herself has not entirely moved on. She stands there, serene, yet her gaze flickers sideways at the spot where Poseidon struck his trident. The salty puddle still bubbles faintly, as if mocking her quiet triumph. On the surface, she has won, and she knows it. But under that calm armor, there's a trace of something else. Not rage, not fury, Just a mild, lingering grudge. The kind you carry not because you need to, but because it feels too satisfying to drop. This grudge doesn't send Athena into fits. She isn't hurling lightning bolts or smashing mountains. No, her annoyance is quieter, more strategic. You imagine her telling herself, "Fine, Poseidon, you wanted a show? I'll show you 10,000 years of prosperity and you can sulk with your puddle." It's the cosmic version of smiling sweetly while holding a scoreboard. A mainstream historical fact slips in here. Athens did for centuries maintain both the olive tree and Poseidon's salt spring inside the Erechtheion on the Acropolis. Visitors could see both gifts enshrined side by side. This wasn't just respect, it was insurance. If Poseidon ever checked in, the Athenians could say, "See? We didn't forget you." But let's be honest, it probably felt like they were displaying his participation trophy next to Athena's shining star. Now, for a quirky tidbit, in some versions of the myth, Poseidon was so insulted by the judgment that he flooded parts of Attica, punishing the city for its decision. Scholars still argue whether this reflects actual memories of ancient coastal floods, or whether it was just a narrative way of explaining why Athens suffered occasional disasters. Either way, the myth paints Poseidon as that guy who loses a board game and insists the rules were unfair. Athena's grudge is different. It isn't thunderous, it's subtle, almost elegant. She never forgets Poseidon tried to outshine her, and she never stops reminding the Athenians that her gift is superior. You can picture her quietly influencing festivals, inspiring laws to protect olive trees, nudging poets to sing of olives rather than waves. Each law and ritual is another notch on her invisible scoreboard. Even centuries later, echoes of the rivalry surface. The Athenians may sail ships blessed by Poseidon, but they carve olive branches into their coins. They may fear earthquakes, his other specialty, but they trust olive oil to heal their wounds and light their lamps. It's a constant, gentle reminder that while Poseidon commands storms, Athena commands daily life. And daily life wins. Historians still argue whether Athena's rivalry with Poseidon was simply a local myth tied to Athens, or whether it reflects wider conflicts between land and sea powers in ancient Greece. Was it metaphorical propaganda to highlight Athens' agricultural base over naval competition? Or a way of reconciling two powerful gods within the same cultural framework? The debate itself feels like part of her grudge. Athena still getting the last word through scholars. You walk through the agora and hear people chatting about it like gossip. Athena bested Poseidon, but he hasn't forgotten. Yes, but she keeps winning anyway. The myth becomes a constant undercurrent, a reminder that gods, like humans, hold on to grudges, though some do it with style. There's something almost comforting in this. Even gods can't let things go. Poseidon simmers with pride wounded. Athena holds a grudge like fine wine, aged, subtle, present in every sip. And the city in between learns to live with both, honoring each while leaning firmly toward the goddess who gave them olives. As you drift along the evening streets, oil lamps glow in doorways, olive branches sway in courtyards, and somewhere in the distance you hear the faint hiss of Poseidon's spring. The balance remains. Athena triumphant, but never letting herself quite forget. A goddess with a favorite tree and a mild grudge tucked away like a folded letter in her cloak pocket. The olive tree has grown taller now, its branches stretching outward, its fruit swelling in the sun. You wander into the daily life of the city that gathers around it, and suddenly you see just how completely Athena's gift wraps itself into ordinary routine. The people wake at dawn to the soft glow of oil lamps sputtering out as the sun rises. They breakfast on bread dipped in olive oil, sometimes sprinkled with herbs, sometimes plain. At midday, merchants hawk amphorae of oil in the agora, their shouts filling the marketplace. Best press, purest gold. And by evening, families huddle again around lamps lit from the same oil that flavored their meals. This is where the tree stops being a myth and starts being infrastructure. A single household might keep jars of oil for cooking, a small amphora for lighting, and another for rubbing into sore muscles. You trail into a farmer's home. Clay floors, smoke curling from a hearth, the smell of pressed olives lingering. He rubs oil into his hands after labor, his children nibbling bread, his wife storing away amphorae as though tucking coins into a bank. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Olive oil became so central to Athens that it was stored in massive public reservoirs and distributed under civic supervision. State records show fines for adulterating oil, taxes paid in oil, even export quotas. Oil wasn't just a food, it was a regulated commodity, something the government treated like treasure. And yet, tucked into that seriousness are quirky uses that feel almost comical. Ancient athletes, as you already glimpsed, coated themselves in oil before competitions. Wrestlers in the palestra gleamed under the sun, then scraped off the mix of sweat and oil with curved tools, selling the goop, yes, selling it, to fans who believed it carried protective or healing powers. Imagine modern sports merchandise, but much more slippery. You drift back into the marketplace, hearing merchants argue over quality. One insists his oil comes from the Morii, the sacred grove said to descend from Athena's original tree. Another swears his olives were pressed on stone rollers so smooth that even Athena herself would approve. Shoppers haggle, testing oil with careful fingers, rubbing it on their skin, sniffing its scent before committing. Historians still argue whether olive cultivation alone could have fueled Athens' rise, or whether the myth of Athena's gift exaggerated its centrality. Some point out that Athens also relied heavily on imported grain from the Black Sea, meaning olives alone couldn't sustain the population. But the symbolism of oil, its presence in every ritual, every home, made it feel like the city's lifeblood even if bread was imported. Everywhere you go, you see it. Sailors smear oil on wood to waterproof their ships. Priests anoint new statues with oil before placing them in temples. Brides receive jars of oil as part of their dowry. At funerals, oil is poured on the pyres, its smoke mingling with incense. The olive's branches are woven into wreaths, hung in homes for protection. It's as though the city itself is one big olive tree, every citizen another branch. And of course, there's food. You sit at a humble dinner. Figs, cheese, bread, and oil in shallow bowls. Fingers dip into it, bread sopping up the golden sheen. The taste is grassy, slightly bitter, warming in the throat. It's not indulgent, not sugary or decadent, but it nourishes in a way that feels timeless. You realize you're tasting the same thing philosophers, soldiers, and children have tasted for centuries. The olive tree's presence in daily reliance isn't loud or dramatic. It's a whisper, a steady hum, like a heartbeat you only notice when you stop. The villagers don't sing songs to Poseidon's salt spring at dinner. They don't light lamps with seawater. They don't build rituals around brine. But oil? Oil fills their hands, their stomachs, their homes, their prayers. You step back into the courtyard where the original tree still grows, now sacred, now protected. Its leaves shimmer in moonlight. Its roots push deeper into the rock of the Acropolis. All around it, the life of Athens pulses outward. Cooks stirring oil into stews, wrestlers smearing it on their arms, merchants measuring it out for trade. Athena's gift is not simply admired, it is lived every single day. You follow a footpath out of the busy agora and into the hush of the olive orchards, where the air cools and the ground softens under a quilt of pale leaves. The trees form a low silver canopy, trunks twisted like old hands at prayer. Boundary stones mark each sacred precinct, the temenos, and chords on some trunks murmur the reminder. These are not ordinary trees. You step into the shade and feel the etiquette change, like entering a library where the books are alive. The Athenians treat certain olives as the Morii, Athena's own, said to descend from her original tree on the Acropolis. They belong to the goddess and, by extension, to the city. Cutting them is not just bad landscaping, it is impiety. State officials stroll these groves with tablets and styluses, counting trunks, noting damage, and ensuring no one's borrowing firewood from a deity. You picture ancient inspectors as a kind of pious forestry service. Part park ranger, part priest, all glare. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Athenian tradition held that damaging a sacred olive could bring severe penalties, overseen by the Areopagus, Athens' venerable council. Ancient authors describe fines, confiscations, and in some tellings exile for those who uprooted a Moria. The message is simple enough to read in the dappled light. Please don't chainsaw the goddess. A quirky tidbit rustles with the leaves. Some storytellers claim the sacred olives were physically connected underground to Athena's primeval tree, as if sharing a single life. Harm won, and the goddess herself felt it. You can't help imagining a mythic root network pinging alerts. Athena's version of push notifications, only made of xylem. Whether anyone truly believed the botany or just cherished the poetry, the rumor did its job. Fewer axes wandered into the groves. The rules in these precincts read like an ancient HOA charter, written in temple script. No grazing goats who nibble bark, no fires near roots, no digging irrigation channels that might drown a trunk. Harvest with care and leave offerings. Small jars of oil, a braid of leaves, a whisper of thanks. If a storm topples a branch, the wood isn't yours to claim. It goes to the city or the temple. Athena's orchard, Athena's rules. Historians still argue whether these protections were primarily religious, legal, or economic. Did the city dress up agrarian policy in divine clothing to keep its most profitable trees safe? Or did piety come first with practical benefits a lucky side effect? The debate curls and twists like the trunks around you, academics tracing the grain for meaning. You pause at a low altar stone flecked with old soot. A family stands quietly, pouring a thin stream of oil onto the slab, so it runs in a gleaming line. First fruits offerings, they say, a small tithe from the new press. The grove smells of crushed leaf and warm resin, of bread from a nearby oven. A child reaches up to touch a leaf, then thinks better of it when her mother clears her throat. There are rules here, and even curious fingers learn them early. At the edge of the precinct, Astelia outlines boundaries, fines, procedures. The city's voice adopts Athena's cadence, calm, precise, firm. If a private field contains a moria, the owner must tend it, water it in drought, report any disease, and never sell or move it. It's like hosting a divine house guest who pays in prestige, not coin. The obligation is heavy, but the honor is real. Families point to their sacred trunk the way neighbors brag about a famous landmark on their street. The grove's hush is occasionally broken by laughter from workers sorting olives. Their baskets fill slowly, the fruit thudding softly as it drops. Someone tells the old story of when Persian fire scorched the Acropolis and the sacred olive there sprouted a fresh shoot the very next day, a resilient green finger raised in defiance. The tale glows like a lamp. Whatever burns can also begin again. You look at the trees and understand why the city made laws to guard them. A magistrate arrives in simple cloak, not to prosecute anyone, just to observe the tally. He chats with the inspectors about beetles, fungus, rainfall, as practical as any modern extension agent. Wisdom wears work clothes here. The goddess of strategy is also the goddess of maintenance schedules. It turns out piety isn't thunderbolts, it's pruning on time. The rules extend to harvest too. Pickers move in steady lines, careful not to beat the branches like borrowed drums. The best fruit goes to sacred oil, pressed for festivals, poured for statues, awarded to victors. You can tell which jars are destined for ritual by the care with which they're sealed. Wax smooth, cords neat, a faint impression of Athena's owl pressed into the closure. Another quirky whisper. A local granny claims that if you apologize to a tree before trimming it, your lamp oil will burn longer that winter. You smirk, but you file it away. A city runs on thousands of tiny courtesies, most of them unprovable, all of them useful. At dusk, the inspectors finish their circuit and make notes for the Areopagus. No stumps where a trunk should be, a few broken limbs after last week's wind, one suspicious scorch mark that earns a stern visit to a neighbor known for careless cooking fires. The system is gentle until it isn't. The penalties exist so the whispers can stay soft. Historians still argue whether the Morii were truly biological descendants of the first tree or simply designated by decree. Maybe the lineage is part botany, part branding, a civic story grafted onto living wood. You stroke a strip of bark and decide the distinction doesn't matter when the shade feels this real. The night wind rises. Leaves flash their silver undersides like 1,000 small shields. Somewhere beyond the grove, Poseidon's salty puddle fizzes on in the temple, kept for memory more than use. Athens' polite nod to the neighbor they didn't choose. Here among the trees, rules feel less like chains than like the trellis of vine climbs. Athena's favor is not a lightning bolt you catch. It's a contract you keep, line by leafy line. You head back toward the city lights as lamps flicker to life, each flame a sip from the day's careful harvest. Behind you, the sacred grove settles into its night silence, a living law code written in trunk, leaf, and root, guarded not just by statutes, but by the quiet consent of a people who have learned, one season at a time, to be worthy of their goddess's patience. By now, the olive tree is not just a pantry and a light source, it's also a banner waved in both peace and war. You drift through the agora on a breezy afternoon and notice how olive branches appear everywhere, tucked above doorways, carried in procession, woven into crowns. But they carry more than one meaning. In the hands of generals, the branches can symbolize victory. In the hands of envoys, they signal surrender or peace. The same twig can declare, "I won," or whisper, "Please stop hitting me." Here's a mainstream historical fact. In Greek tradition, olive branches were used as tokens of supplication. When citizens approached an altar or pleaded for mercy, they often carried olive boughs wrapped with wool. The symbolism was clear. I come unarmed, seeking peace. Even ambassadors from foreign cities walked into Athens carrying them. It was like flashing a universal hall pass. Don't strike. Let's talk. Yet the same tree fuels war. Olive oil becomes essential for maintaining weapons and armor, keeping bronze gleaming, leather supple. Soldiers carried jars into campaigns, not just for eating, but for cleaning wounds. You imagine hoplites marching with shields on their arms, amphorae of oil sloshing in supply carts, a reminder that Athena's gift follows them even onto the battlefield. A quirky tidbit emerges here. Some ancient writers say that when Roman envoys later came to negotiate peace, they carried olive branches too, borrowing the custom straight from the Greeks. By then, the olive had become an international symbol of truce, one of those ideas too practical not to spread. It's amusing to think of hardened warriors carefully carrying twigs into meetings like awkward props, knowing the symbolism mattered more than the words. Historians still argue whether the olive's dual role, peace branch and war fuel, was coincidence or design. Did Athena intend it to be both? Or did society simply stretch its symbolism in every direction? Because once something becomes sacred, it's too convenient not to recycle? The debate feels endless, the olive a mirror for human contradiction. You walk into a festival and see athletes crowned with olive wreaths, branches curling around their brows. The wreath is both a peace sign and a brag, a way of saying, I won in the goddess's city. Oil from sacred groves is poured into amphora with painted owls, given as prizes. Victors carry them home like treasure chests, each jar a double emblem, wealth and the goddess's smile. At the same time, you see generals sharpening swords while rubbing handles with oil, their soldiers cracking bread into bowls of the same substance. A product of peace, fueling war. You can almost hear Athena's chuckle in the background. Strategy is never just one-sided. The paradox shows in ritual too. Before battles, priests pour oil on altars to secure divine favor. After battles, olive branches decorate victory monuments. But also, after truces, envoys return carrying branches home. The tree weaves through all outcomes, impartial but ever present. In the quiet of an evening, you sit by the Acropolis wall and watch a procession of women carrying olive branches in a festival. Their steps are slow, their voices chanting hymns. The branches catch torchlight, casting shifting leaf shadows on stone. Peace feels tangible in that moment, a whispering of leaves promising safety. But you know somewhere beyond, fleets are being stocked with jars of oil, hoplites training in the gymnasium, and war drums beating faintly. The olive has become what Athens itself becomes. Paradoxical. Fiercely warlike, yet constantly preaching democracy and civic order. Aggressive on the seas, yet branding itself as wise and moderate. The tree captures that duality, both sword and olive branch, both sustenance and symbol, and here you are, leaning against the warm stone, listening to distant chants, the clash of bronze in the training ground, the rustle of olive leaves above. You realize that in Athens, peace and war are never far apart, just as the olive branch and the oil amphora are born of the same fruit. Athena's gift doesn't erase conflict. It frames it, gives it balance, makes it survivable. You close your eyes, letting the faint smell of oil lamps drift into the night, the air heavy with contradictions. One tree, two meanings, and an entire city learning to live with the tension between them. By now, the olive has woven itself so tightly into the city's veins that you can't walk a single street without brushing against its presence. Amphorae are stacked in storerooms like towers of clay. Merchants measure oil in bronze ladles, haggling with gestures as much as words. Scribes scratch numbers on wax tablets, calculating taxes and trade. The humble fruit of Athena's tree has turned into an economic engine, quietly powering ships, temples, and festivals. Here's a mainstream historical fact. By the classical period, Athens was exporting olive oil across the Mediterranean, often in those distinctively painted amphorae awarded at the Panathenaic Games. Archaeologists have unearthed them as far away as Egypt, Italy, and Syria. The city's economy, famous for silver from Laurian mines, was also flush with the steady river of oil pouring from its presses. Athens didn't just worship the olive, it monetized it. You follow a caravan of donkeys trudging toward the Piraeus harbor, each loaded with jars sealed in wax. At the docks, long ships wait with bellies empty, ready to carry oil outward and bring grain inward. Because here's the paradox. Athens could not feed itself with its rocky soil. Instead, it traded oil for wheat from the Black Sea. Oil out, bread in. The olive was currency, the liquid thread tying together survival. A quirky tidbit rolls in with the waves. Some inscriptions suggest that even victorious athletes' oil prizes, those amphorae stacked high, were not just for personal use. Many winners immediately sold them, turning prestige into cold, hard drachmas. Imagine winning the Olympics today and pawning the gold medal for cash, only in this case it's jars of cooking oil. Practical? Yes. Glamorous? Less so. Historians still argue whether olive oil exports were more symbolic than profitable. Some scholars point to Athens' reliance on imported grain and silver, suggesting oil alone couldn't fund the empire. Others insist that the prestige of Athenian oil, reputedly the purest and most sacred, gave it unique weight in Mediterranean trade. The debate mirrors the oil itself, slippery, golden, impossible to pin down. Meanwhile, the city spends its olive wealth in grand gestures. Temples rise, columns gleaming white against the sky. The Parthenon itself is financed in part by Athens' booming trade, its treasury stocked with tribute, silver, and oil revenues. Inside, priests pour sacred oil as offerings to Athena, while outside, stonemasons labor with wages funded by the same resource. You realize the goddess's tree doesn't just feed stomachs, it bankrolls marble dreams. Festivals also benefit. At the Panathenaic procession, jars of oil glitter in the sun, borne by youths in ceremonial dress. The amphorae are painted with scenes of Athena and athletes, black figures dancing across orange clay. Each jar is both container and canvas, art and commodity, devotion and paycheck. The city is not shy about showing off its favorite crop. You wander through the agora again, where contracts are struck under shaded awnings. A merchant boasts that his oil was pressed from the Morii, Athena's sacred groves. Whether true or not, the claim drives up the price. Housewives shuffle by with smaller jars for cooking. Philosophers dip bread into bowls between arguments about virtue. Everyone from farmers to generals touches the olive economy in some way. And beyond the city, fleets depend on it. Sailors rub oil into ropes and timbers, waterproofing their vessels. Amphorae stacked in holds slosh as the triremes row toward islands and colonies. Oil is both cargo and tool, profit and preservation. In the salty air of Piraeus, you catch the scent of olives alongside tar and fish, the smell of empire in motion. The more you look, the more the olive feels like the city's bloodstream. Without it, lamps would darken, kitchens would starve, rituals would falter, and trade would collapse. With it, the city glows, literally from every lamp, and figuratively from the wealth it generates. You lean on a sun-warmed wall, amphorae stacked beside you, listening to merchants haggle, sailors shout, and philosophers mutter. The olive tree, born from a goddess's calm hand, has become Athens' economic powerhouse, its silent partner in empire. And as the sun dips low, turning the amphorae golden in its light, you feel how Athena's gift extends far beyond myth. It's not just a tree anymore, it's a treasury, a fleet, a temple, and a festival all at once. The marketplace is still buzzing with amphorae, contracts, and cargoes, but you begin to notice how people aren't just talking about olives. They're talking about the story of the olive. The myth itself has become a second kind of currency, traded in poems, plays, and political speeches. Athens tells the tale of Athena's victory again and again, each retelling shading it differently depending on who needs to win an argument. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Myths in Greece weren't static bedtime stories. They shifted with context, sung by rhapsodes and festivals, reshaped by tragedians like Euripides, and even invoked in the law courts. In fact, litigants in Athens sometimes quoted myths as evidence, weaving divine precedent into human squabbles. If Athena could outwit Poseidon with a tree, surely your neighbor can't claim divine backing for stealing your donkey. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some ancient commentators suggested the contest wasn't originally a myth about crops at all, but about politics. They claimed the story of Athena's triumph encoded an early dispute between groups in Attica, farmers and inland folk supporting Athena, fishermen and coastal dwellers leaning toward Poseidon. In this reading, the myth was less about gifts and more about allegiances, a way of smoothing over a civic compromise. That would make the olive tree a kind of ancient campaign slogan. Historians still argue whether the myth was ever truly about gods, or if it was always about people. People finding a way to unify under one patron, even if that meant writing their own arguments into the heavens. Was Athena's victory divine decree or carefully curated civic propaganda? The debate keeps scholars scribbling like jurors still deliberating a case that's thousands of years old. You drift into a symposium, the air thick with wine and olive oil lamps flickering. Philosophers lean on couches, debating the deeper meaning of the myth. One insists it proves wisdom always beats brute force. Another claims it shows the city's destiny to favor agriculture and law over wild sea power. A third sips his cup and mutters that the whole thing is just a convenient excuse to tax olive oil exports. The argument spirals, but all agree on one thing. The myth is more than story, it's ideology. In the theater too, playwrights drop sly references. A chorus might mock Poseidon's salty temper or praise Athena's foresight. The audience chuckles, not because they think the gods are really bickering on stage, but because they recognize their own city in the allegory. The myth has become a mirror. Meanwhile, priests retell the tale at festivals, but with a different emphasis. The olive tree not just as economy, but as divine trust. Athena gave this to us, they remind the people, and so we must tend it as a sacred duty. Farmers nod, children gape, merchants smile. Everyone hears what they need to hear. And through it all, you sense Athena's mild grudge still pulsing underneath. She doesn't rage, but the myth is always told in a way that favors her. Poseidon is mentioned, sure, but often as the loud uncle whose gift was flashy but useless. The story is curated to ensure the goddess's wisdom always comes out on top, and her tree remains at the center of civic pride. You notice something else too. By repeating the myth, Athens shapes its identity. The olive tree is no longer just a resource, it's a claim of superiority. Other cities may have vineyards, herds, mines, but Athens? Athens has the wisdom tree, proof that their goddess chose them above all others. The myth becomes national branding, an ancient logo stamped into memory. As you walk out of the symposium into the cool night, you hear olive leaves rustling in the wind. They sound almost like whispers, carrying the debates, arguments, and retellings through time. Was it a divine contest, a political allegory, a farmer's daydream, or a myth retrofitted to fit reality? Scholars then and now still can't quite decide. But for the Athenians, it hardly matters. The olive tree stands and the story stands with it. Both are rooted deep in the city's soil, both nourishing, both stubborn. And you, drifting towards sleep, realize you've been pulled into the debate too, lulled by the rustling of leaves that argue even in silence. The debates and festivals fade into quieter rhythms as you wander through the smaller corners of Athens, where the olive isn't just a civic emblem, but part of the intimate fabric of life. You slip into narrow lanes, past clay-roofed houses, and smell oil warming over hearths. Here the tree's presence is gentler, not in amphorae stacked for export, not in decrees carved on stone, but in the rituals of ordinary people. You peek into a courtyard where a wedding is underway. The bride, veiled and glowing, receives olive oil as part of her dowry. Jars are presented not only as useful household staples, but as symbols of prosperity and fertility. A crown of olive branches rests lightly on her head, a quiet nod to Athena's blessing. Guests murmur blessings while dipping bread into oil mixed with honey, a sweet symbol of new beginnings. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Olive oil featured in many Greek religious ceremonies, from birth to burial. Infants were anointed with it as a form of protection. Warriors were rubbed with it before leaving for war. At funerals, bodies were washed and oiled, the scent rising into the air as a final honor. Olive oil was the thread that tied life's stages together. And here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found tiny clay votive offerings shaped like amphorae, miniature jars filled not with oil, but with hopes. People would leave them at shrines, little terracotta thank you notes to Athena and the gods. They look almost like ancient dollhouse props, reminders that even the poorest could symbolically gift oil when they couldn't afford the real thing. Historians still argue whether such rituals reflect genuine devotion or were just social obligations dressed up as piety. Did Athenians truly believe Athena cared about their little offerings, or did they participate because everyone else did? The line between belief and performance, faith and tradition, is blurred, and scholars admit they may never fully untangle it. You walk farther and witness oil used in healing. A mother massages a child's bruised knee with oil warmed over coals. An old man bent with age rubs oil into stiff joints, sighing in relief. He murmurs a prayer to Athena for strength, but whether it's the goddess or the soothing balm that comforts him, no one asks too closely. At night, you see the oil lamps glowing again, but this time it isn't the grand blaze of temples or symposium halls. It's the soft light in humble homes. A woman adjusts a wick, oil rising steadily to feed the flame. Shadows dance against the walls as she tells her children stories of gods, of heroes, of the day Athena planted a tree. The myth is not grand or formal here. It's bedtime reassurance, a tale that anchors their sense of belonging. At funerals, the olive returns once more. You drift with mourners carrying oil to pour over pyres, mingling with smoke and incense. The flame rises higher, carrying the soul toward the gods. The mourners step back, faces flickering with grief, but also with the comfort that the ritual has been done properly, that Athena's tree has blessed one more passage from a life to death. And the daily rituals keep circling. Oil on bread, oil in lamps, oil in prayers. The olive tree lives in dozens of tiny gestures, not just in marble temples. You realize the myth thrives less in poetry and more in repetition. The constant, quiet use of the goddess's gift, woven into every day until it no longer feels like a gift at all, but like air. As you walk home with the Athenians, jars clinking softly at their sides, you feel the city itself breathe in rhythm with the olive tree. It's in the meals, the marriages, the medicine, and the mourning. Athena's grudge may hum in the background, and scholars may argue endlessly about meaning, but for the people, the truth is simple. The olive tree is always there, and under its silver leaves, life in Athens continues. Ordinary, ritual-filled, unremarkably divine. You leave the courtyards of Athens and drift forward in time, watching how the olive slips beyond Greek soil into the bustling streets of Rome. Empires rise and fall, but the tree endures, carried like a quiet passenger in trade ships and military campaigns. By the time the Romans take center stage, Athena's sacred plant has become so ingrained in Mediterranean life that even Jupiter himself might as well have been crowned with a wreath of olives. Roman farmers adopt the olive tree eagerly. You see villas dotting the Italian countryside, each with its grove of twisted trunks, presses churning, amphorae stacked in cellars. The Romans are practical people. They don't just tell stories about the olive, they turn it into an industry. Manuals survive from writers like Cato the Elder, who practically gave step-by-step guides on cultivating olives, pressing oil, and selling it for maximum profit. Imagine a YouTube farming tutorial but carved into Latin prose. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Romans spread olive cultivation across their empire, from Spain to North Africa, from Provence to the Levant. Vast estates produced oil in industrial quantities, shipping it to Rome where massive storage facilities, the Horea Olearia, kept supplies flowing. The city quite literally ran on olive oil, not just for cooking, but for lighting, bathing, and ritual. Mountains of broken amphorae at Monte Testaccio, a landfill of oil jars outside Rome, still testify to that overwhelming flow of liquid gold. And here's a quirky tidbit. Roman bathhouses used olive oil instead of soap. Visitors rubbed oil onto their skin, then scraped it off with a curved tool called a strigil. The mixture of sweat, dirt, and oil was sometimes collected and sold as a kind of skin treatment. Picture it. Bottles of authentic athlete's oil sold in stalls, the ancient ancestor of today's overpriced wellness fads. But the olive carried stories, too. The Romans didn't forget its Greek heritage. They identified Athena with their own goddess Minerva and continued to revere the tree as her gift. Temples to Minerva often had olive motifs carved into friezes, branches curling in stone. Victors in Roman games were crowned with wreaths of olive or laurel, echoing Greek customs but adding Roman grandeur. Historians still argue whether the Romans truly saw themselves as inheritors of Greek olive mythology, or whether they simply borrowed the tree for practical reasons and draped myths over it afterward. Was Minerva's olive tree a heartfelt adoption or just branding for something already indispensable? The debate rustles like leaves in both Greek and Latin texts. You stroll through a Roman forum, the air heavy with trade. Amphorae marked with stamps, origin, estate, inspector, are stacked like filing cabinets. Traders argue over Spanish oil versus African oil, each boasting its purity and richness. Roman housewives dipped bread into oil just as their Greek predecessors did. But now the empire's reach means flavors vary. The olive has become multicultural, Mediterranean, imperial. In private homes, you see Romans burning oil in lamps shaped like animals or gods, light flickering against frescoed walls. You see writers like Pliny the Elder describing varieties of olives, cataloging them with scientific detail as if Athena's quiet tree had blossomed into a subject of encyclopedias. And always, in the background, the mythology lingers. Romans retell the Athenian contest as part of their cultural inheritance, admiring the clever goddess who bested Poseidon. In doing so, they absorb a piece of Athens' pride, weaving it into their own identity as heirs of Greek wisdom. The olive tree has crossed a cultural border, thriving in new soil without losing its old stories. And you, drifting among Roman villas and forums, feel the continuity. The same oil that lit Athenian lamps now fills Roman lanterns. The same branches that crowned Greek victors now rest on Roman brows. Athena's tree has slipped quietly into another language, another empire, yet remains eternal. You find yourself back where it all began, standing on the Acropolis in the hush of early morning. The sacred olive tree rises from the stone, gnarled and weathered, but still alive. Its leaves catch the first light, silver on one side, green on the other, shimmering like coins as dawn stirs. The air smells faintly of dust, stone, and oil lamps burnt out in the night. All around you are the ghosts of amphorae, processions, merchants, athletes, priests. Every generation that bent toward this tree as though it were both anchor and compass. Athena's gift has endured wars, fires, and floods. The Persians burned Athens, but the legend says the sacred tree sprouted a new shoot the very next day, a defiant green finger pointing skyward. Romans carried the olive across their empire. Christians later anointed with oil in rituals, and still today the branch is lifted as a symbol of peace. What began as a small, practical gesture in a contest with Poseidon has stretched across 3,000 years of human history, stubborn as the tree's roots. Here's your mainstream historical fact. There is, even now, an olive tree standing on the Acropolis, claimed to be descended from Athena's original. Botanists can't prove that, of course, but Athenians have replanted new shoots from it whenever disaster struck, ensuring continuity. It is a living myth, a biological thread tying modern Athens to its ancient patron. And for a quirky tidbit, travelers in the 19th century, charmed by the Acropolis tree, often chipped away pieces of bark or root to take home as souvenirs. Guides even sold Athena's olive sprigs to tourists, half devotional, half entrepreneurial. Athena, you imagine, would roll her eyes but also appreciate the business sense. Historians still argue whether the olive contest ever truly happened as myth says, or whether it was always a civic tale invented to explain the city's agricultural and economic reality. But here in the soft dawn, it doesn't matter. The debate itself has become part of the story, another layer of roots entwined in the rock. You sit beneath the tree and feel how it has never stopped whispering, of wisdom over force, of patience over spectacle, of usefulness over pride. You remember Poseidon's saltwater spring still bubbling faintly in the Erechtheion, like a footnote Athens politely kept. You remember Athena's serene face, her quiet grudge, her calm hand pressing the sapling into soil. The tree still carries both, triumph and rivalry, usefulness and myth. And so the olive stands eternal, shading the stones with silver light, carrying memory in its branches. You lean back against its trunk, feeling rough bark under your palm, hearing the leaves murmur like lullabies in the breeze. The city hums below, modern and ancient at once. And you, listening to the whispers, realize that Athena's gift was never just a tree. It was a promise that wisdom, patience, and resilience outlast storms, grudges, and empires. The story softens now, like footsteps fading on marble, like oil lamps guttering into quiet darkness. You're still beneath the tree, but the voices of Athens have grown faint. The merchants no longer haggle, the judges no longer debate, even the priests have gone silent. Only the rustle of leaves remains, steady and gentle, a rhythm older than cities. The olive's branches sway slowly in the night breeze, their silvery undersides flashing like fish beneath calm water. The trunk is warm against your back, the bark rough yet grounding, like the touch of something that has seen centuries come and go. You take a long, slow breath, and the air tastes faintly of oil and earth. Everything else slips away. The myth has carried you through contests, grudges, markets, wars, weddings, and funerals. Yet here at the end, it asks nothing more of you. No decisions, no debates, just rest. The goddess's grudge is mild now, more a memory than a storm. Poseidon's waves are distant, like a tide rolling far out to sea. All that matters is the steady pulse of leaves above you, whispering that life goes on, patient and enduring. Your thoughts slow to match their rhythm. Each inhale feels like a root sinking deeper into the soil. Each exhale like a branch stretching quietly into the night sky. Lamps flicker once, then vanish, leaving only starlight. The Acropolis fades into shadow, but the tree remains, a sentinel against time, a reminder that even in the hardest rock, something green can grow. Let your body grow heavy now. Let the hum of the olive's wisdom settle around you like a blanket. And let the last image be simple. A tree, still standing, leaves whispering, all the world at peace.